On the broadcast tonight, South Korea's response. Pyongyang needs to start showing sincerity through actions and not words, says Seoul, in response to the North proposal a day earlier. Historical appeal for victims of sexual slavery. The U.S. House and now the Senate passes a bill that urges Japan to apologize for its sexual enslavement of women during World War II. And on the third day of President Park Geun-hye's trip to India, the Korean leader focuses on bilateral cooperation between the two countries on information and communications technology. Early edition begins now. It is 4 a.m. in Richmond, Virginia, 11 in Cairo, and 6 on a Friday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Geon-young.
And I'm Daniel Chen. Thank you for joining us. Today, we also begin with President Park Geun-hye's state visit to India.
Right, we begin there in India, where the president attended a meeting in New Delhi on the third day of her trip, where strengthening bilateral cooperation in the information and communications technology sector was the focal point. The CEOs of leading Korean and Indian firms were there, along with prominent figures from academia. Now, President Park told them that collaborating in the ICT sector would promote sustainable economic growth and create new jobs in both countries. Combine Korea's strength in hardware and India's in software, she said both countries could open up new opportunities in the global market if they worked together. Moving now to inter-Korean relations, Pyongyang needs to start showing sincerity through its actions and not its words. That's South Korea's response to North Korea's proposal a day earlier to end all cross-border slandering and reduce military tensions. And Seoul's annual joint military drills with Washington will take place as scheduled next month. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Hwang Sung-hee reports.
South Korea rebuffed on Friday North Korea's proposal to stop the cross-border mudslinging, saying the North should find concrete ways to demonstrate its sincerity if it wants to improve inter-Korean relations.
It is North Korea that has continued to slander us despite an earlier inter-Korean agreement not to use slander. The North must remember that trust between the two Koreas will be built through action, not words.
In what it called an important proposal Thursday, the North's National Defense Commission offered to initiate steps to ease tensions between the two Koreas if Seoul called off its annual military exercises with Washington that take place in early spring. Seoul reiterated the regular exercises will continue as long as the North poses a threat to the South.
Our military drills are annual defensive training exercises carried out by a sovereign state, and we officially notified neighboring countries, including North Korea, every year, as is the international custom.
Seoul said Pyongyang must take practical steps towards denuclearization to secure peace on the Korean peninsula, and called for a swift resumption of family reunions for those separated since the Korean War, which it said would be a first step toward friendlier inter-Korean ties. Experts say that with the rejection, relations between the two Koreas will be on thin ice, at least for now. South Korea remains wary of any new conciliatory gestures by the North. Just last year, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un proposed better inter-Korean ties in his New Year's Day speech, but followed that with a third nuclear test a month later. Hwang Sung-hee, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, North Korea has agreed to pay a hefty fine to retrieve one of its ships that was seized in Panama back in June. Well, Panama's Foreign Minister Fernando Nunes said Thursday that Pyongyang had agreed to pay the fine, which amounts to $670,000. The North Korean ship, which was carrying 2 Cuban fighter jets and missiles, was intercepted en route to Cuba by Panamanian authorities last summer. 32 of the ship's 35 crew members will be set free, while the other 3, including the captain, will remain in Panamanian custody for the time being.
The U.S. House and now the Senate have passed a bill that urges Japan to apologize for its sexual enslavement of women during World War II And it's almost certain now that Japan will come under great international pressure to acknowledge its wartime atrocities. Our Han Daeun has more on this historic development.
The U.S. Senate, for the first time in the history of U.S. legislation, has included the issue of the so-called comfort women in its spending bill. On Thursday local time, the Senate passed a bill that calls on the Japanese government to stick to a 2007 resolution which urged Tokyo to issue an official apology for its wartime sexual enslavement of women. The bill also calls on the U.S. Secretary of State to encourage Japan to address the issues raised in the resolution. Comfort women euphemistically refers to women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military during the Second World War. An estimated 200,000 women, mostly Korean, are known to have been abused as sex slaves by Japanese troops in the early 20th century. The bill will be taken to the White House for President Barack Obama's signature on Friday. Despite such an unprecedented call from the U.S. to apologize, some Japanese politicians are going in the opposite direction. A group of Japanese lawmakers who claim a comfort woman statue erected in the U.S. city of Glendale should be removed stormed into Glendale City Hall on Thursday to file a complaint. City officials, however, refused to meet them, saying there was no reason to remove the statue as it was built for humanitarian reasons. But the Japanese group didn't stop here. They waved Japanese flags and took pictures in front of the statue to the shock of passers-by. Attention is now focused on how the Japanese government will react following Washington's passing of the bill. Han Daeun, Arirang News.
And in the U.S. state of Virginia, school textbooks there may soon identify the body of water between Korea and Japan by two names instead of one. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
A bill that would require the body of water between Korea and Japan to be identified as both the East Sea and the Sea of Japan in local public school textbooks is moving through the Virginia state legislature. The bill submitted by Democrat David Marson was passed on Thursday with bipartisan support in a vote of 9-4 by the Virginia Senate's Education and Health Committee. This is a second attempt to pass the bill after it was voted down 2 years ago. Korea considers the name Sea of Japan as a legacy of Japan's imperialistic past, as it came into use during Japan's colonial rule of Korea in the early 20th century. Japan claims the name was used way before that and is reportedly trying to block the bill by lobbying Virginia lawmakers. Senator Marson, however, defended the bill.
We're not changing U.S. policy. We're not changing the name of the ocean. It's taught in our SOLs and the guidelines to our standards of learning. We're merely reflecting what we're teaching children.
Korean Americans in Virginia welcomed the bill's approval but voiced concerns about the bill's future, pointing to the committee's 4 no votes. But if it's passed by the full Senate and the lower house of the legislature, the bill could take effect as early as July. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Reducing red tape and easing regulations to create a more friendly environment for foreign firms to do business in Korea. That is one of the Park Geun-hye administration's major policy goals for this year as it seeks to attract foreign investment and stoke domestic demand.
Clearly, we have some very clear-cut focal points, and she even presided over a newly launched ministerial meeting for deregulation. What can we expect out of these reforms, and how effective will they be? Joining us live in the studio is Dr. Song Won-gun, Director of Public Policy and Senior Research Fellow at the Korea Economic Research Institute. Dr. Song, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Dr. Song, the Korean government has announced plans for major deregulation efforts to attract investment. And what are some key regulations that actually stand in the way of boosting investment and creating a business-friendly environment as of now?
The regulations that limit investments and startups are the entry barriers and land use regulations, especially for the development and growth of service sector. You know, compared to manufacturing, the productivity of service sector in Korea is relatively low and stagnant. One reason is that the regulations, especially regulations that cause high entry barriers, restrain the expansion of the market. health-related services and educational service, tourism, financial services, and software industry are the major service sectors that can create high value-added products and services and create jobs. But in these sectors, there are numerous regulations, and especially regulations that create entry barriers. For instance, only people who have licenses can start and operate business in these sectors. So, for example, only doctors can establish hospitals and so on. And other regulations, such as land use regulations, zoning regulations, also limit the investments and development of the service sectors. Those are the main regulations that limit the investments right now.
Right. As part of measures to bring about this change, the government did mention the cap system on corporate regulations. What do they mean by this? Could you elaborate a little bit further?
That implies that the government will monitor and abide by the total number of regulations. It is similar to one in and one out system that is working in the United Kingdom. In order for the government to implement a new regulation, it needs to repeal one other regulation. But the plan of the current government is a little bit different from this system. The government has a plan to give a different weight to each regulation, and then you can calculate and monitor the weighted total number of regulations. And that is the method the government will adopt for controlling, set the cap for the total number of regulations.
Now, if the regulations are either eased or scrapped altogether, now according to this plan, what are the expected benefits?
Even though the government is trying to relax or ease the regulations that can limit startups and investments, the departments or divisions in the government have a tendency to create new regulations. So if the government can control the total number of regulations, it can repeal or relax the regulations that are the obstacles to investments without implementing new regulations. So we could expect that the regulation will take away the barriers that limit investments. Then it will create investments, and it will also increase startups. So it will result in the creation of jobs. So eventually, deregulation or regulatory reform will spur economic growth. That's what we will expect.
Right, so regulatory reforms leading to more jobs and a better economy. But would there not be fallouts as well from this too much of a deregulation?
Not really, but I think that some interest groups will be against deregulation that have been, because the regulations have been protecting their interests by erecting high entry barriers also. So that might cause, I think, that social and political unrest. So the government needs to clarify the economic and social gains from deregulation and try to persuade opposition groups. But I don't think that there is less problem in the economic sense from deregulation.
Okay, so the government seeks to attract foreign investment, stoke domestic demand through easing regulations. But would you say this is enough?
I don't think this is enough. Regulatory reform or deregulation is the big part of the plan for encouraging the investments and domestic demand. But it is not enough to spur domestic demand and economic growth, because there are other sectors like a taxation system and public sector. Taxation system should be restructured to encourage investment, because right now the government has been trying to increase tax revenues for covering the increasing welfare expenditure by raising corporate and personal income taxes but it will discourage the investments and employment. So I think that the structure of corporate income tax should be reformed to reduce the tax burden on companies. Then it will encourage investments and create more jobs, I think. Then. And public sector reform is also needed, because inefficiencies in public sector will misallocate resources and then inhibit economic growth. So these sectors, the reforms for these sectors will be needed for more domestic demand and economic growth.
Right, and we have been seeing the Park Geun-hye administration going really to its entirety in reforming the public sector and its lax management. Right. Now, should this regulatory reform succeed, do you foresee the Park Geun-hye administration's goal of an ultimate economic innovation and its 7-4-7 policy goal of targets of 4% growth, 70% employment rate, and annual per capita income of $40,000? Do you foresee that happening?
I think that the regulatory deregulation is a necessary condition for the economic innovation in Korean economy. But as I already mentioned, that there is a more condition, because we need more reforms for taxation reform and public sector reform should be complemented for the government to attain these goals. But these goals are sometimes looks ideal, especially for the 70% of employment rate. But anyway, we need a goal for the measures.
Because that was a very difficult question for anyone. And of course, setting the bar higher is, there's no harm in that, and there's no harm in trying. And of course, it would be great if we accomplish that goal.
Right,
well, Dr. Song Won-geun, thank you so much for joining us today and providing us your insights.
Thank you very much.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now, shifting gears to the economy, Korea's import prices rose by 2 points. Now, shifting to domestic politics, 3 sitting lawmakers have lost their seats in Korea's parliament after the Supreme Court on Thursday found them guilty of illegal electioneering. Now, this means the rival parties will have to prepare for by-elections on top of local elections set for June. Arirang News parliamentary correspondent Kim Hyun-ji reports.
It was the last thing Korea's major political parties wanted. But with the removal of 3 lawmakers on Thursday, by-elections will have to be held. The lawmakers told to clear their desks were found guilty of illegal electioneering ahead of the 2012 general elections. One of the 3 was a proportional representative, which means the person next in line on the ruling party's proportional representation ticket will automatically assume her position. But the constituencies previously represented by the 2 other lawmakers will have to elect a new lawmaker in July. At least 6 other lawmakers face the possibility of losing their seats on similar illegal electioneering charges and are awaiting the Supreme Court's final verdict. Political watchers say the shakeup means up to 15 seats could be up for grabs for the July by-election. By-elections are usually held twice a year in April and in October, but this year, the first by-election should be held on July 30th. This is because of a special provision that says a by-election should be held the first Wednesday that falls 50 days after local elections. This means, theoretically, that Korea will have 3 elections in the span of 5 months. The June 4th local elections, a by-election on July 30th, and another by-election on October 29th. The rival parties agree that they should reduce the number of elections from the current 3 to 2, but they differ on how to go about it. The ruling Saenuri Party says the June local elections and the July by-election should be combined and held together in June. But the main opposition Democratic Party says the 2 by-elections should be combined and held in October. The rival parties have agreed to discuss the matter next week at the Special Parliamentary Committee to Reform Politics. Although both parties say their proposal is the best to reduce administrative costs and voter fatigue, pundits say their own political interests have certainly been taken into consideration. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
AI or avian influenza is back. Korean officials have confirmed the outbreak in the southern part of the country, in the nation's first case of the virus since 2011. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs said Friday it had confirmed the presence of the H5N1 virus in a poultry at a farm in Gochang, Jeollabuk-do province. The AI case was first reported on Thursday, prompting provincial authorities to call all 20,000 ducks there, and access to the area has been restricted. Farms in other provinces that have recently bought ducks from the Gochang farm are also taking precautionary measures against the virus. Korea's last avian influenza outbreak in 2011 resulted in the culling of 3 million birds. This Friday is the 100th anniversary of the modern painter Park Geun-hye's birth. To mark this occasion, the largest retrospective ever held in Korea is now open. Our culture correspondent Park Ji-won tells us why this painter is one of the most loved artists in the nation.
This is one of the most famous masterpieces by the late modern painter Park Geun-hye. Its depiction of Korean women squatting over a stream, doing their laundry, shows the painter's compassion for humanity and ordinary people who live humble lives. This signature feature of Park's paintings is also evident in his work The Old and the Young. In fact, Park was known for his depictions of ordinary people doing simple tasks, and his works convey something of the beauty of everyday life. Park Geun-hye was born in 1914 and taught himself to paint as a teenager. He died at the age of 52 in 1965, having never seen fame in his lifetime. Park struggled with poverty all his life and lived through the most turbulent period in modern Korean history, spanning from the period of Japan's colonial rule of the peninsula to the Korean War. His paintings are portraits of a modern Korea in development by an unpretentious observer. The eldest son of the late painter Park Sung-nam remembers the time his father drew a portrait of him when he was 4 in 1952.
This is a portrait of me that my father drew over a period of 5 hours. I think the picture symbolizes father-son relations in the sorrowful period after the Korean War, during which many families were separated.
The elder Park captured people at the market, street vendors, and old trees that symbolized endurance and hope in hard times.
Park Geun-hye's works have subdued granite colors, and they mostly show our humble neighbors, like the old, women, or playful children. Although his works are from a half-century ago, these people feel as familiar as if they were our neighbors today.
The exhibition is the largest retrospective of Park Geun-hye ever held in Korea and displays about 120 of the painter's works. The exhibition continues until mid-March at Kana Insa Art Center in Central Seoul. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
The citizens of Beijing are breathing a little easier today, one day after fine dust levels in the capital soared dangerously high. The U.S. Embassy in Beijing says the level of ultrafine dust particles was hovering at around 160 micrograms per cubic meter on Friday. That's far lower than the more than 670 micrograms recorded on Thursday, a figure that's more than 26 times the safety limit set by the World Health Organization.
And Korea has been feeling the effects as well. The dust has blown over the West Sea from China, prompting Korean authorities to issue their first ultrafine dust warning of the year on Friday. The levels peaked in the early afternoon, but have since gone down.
And here in the nation's capital, there was once a ultrafine dust advisory issued at about 3 p.m. However, was lifted an hour later. So let's go take a look at how the conditions are right now. Bo-kyung, so the visibility was quite low in the capital early this morning. How are things looking like now?
Good evening, guys. Well, as you just mentioned, the pre-fine dust warning that was issued was called off at 4 p.m. in Seoul, so we should be able to breathe a little easier from now on.
Well, that's some good news, but do we have more good news in store for us this weekend, weather-wise, Bo-kyung?
That's right. That's because temperatures will remain in the seasonal average range with clear skies, so the weather looks to be perfect for outdoor activities. But keep in mind that although fine dust has cleared out in Seoul, the southern regions will continue to see high levels of fine dust through later tonight. Other than that, don't get too used to this weather because snow is on its way on Monday. Taking a look at tomorrow's readings, Seoul reaches 2 degrees, meanwhile Gwangju and Busan hit 5 and 7 degrees respectively. Moving on to other regions, Daejeon peaks at 2 degrees while Dokdo and Mount Kumgang top out at 3 and -5 degrees respectively. Well, hope you have a wonderful Friday night, and I'll be back with more updates after 8.
Thank you for that, Bo-kyung. And that's all from us for this week. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Chen.
And I'm Moon Gon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you right back here same time Monday evening. Good night.